Hello, it's Stuart, the Unrepentant Atheist. Thank you for tuning into my channel. And today I'm going to be reviewing a film which I've seen called Come Sunday, which maybe some of you have seen it. It's about a Bishop Carlton Pearson. It's a true story, or at least it's based on a true story. Bishop Carlton Pearson, who was in a church called Church of God in Christ, a kind of evangelical type church, which, from what I've seen in the actual film, seemed to be like sort of three-quarters black congregation. So what the film was about is this bishop who had an experience, felt that God had spoken to him, and he changed his view about the doctrine of salvation. So, which got him into a lot of trouble with the congregation and with the top people in the church, and I believe he was kind of excommunicated. So there are a couple of I recognize two of the actors in the film. One is Danny Glover, and the other one is Martin Sheen. I didn't recognize any of the others, but I've kind of lost touch with cinema to a large extent in the last 20 or so years. So this is a charismatic evangelical sort of born-again Christian type of character who in some of the early scenes is seen saving a woman on an aeroplane and preaching to his congregation in a very kind of charismatic way. You know the kind of thing I'm talking about. So he had an experience which I think, from the film's point of view, triggered his change of mind on this issue of redemption. It's effectively the Christian redemption that only through Jesus Christ can you be saved, and that everybody else is going to burn in hell. So what happened was that he had a relative, I think he was an uncle, who was in prison. I don't know what the crime was, but this uncle had asked the bishop to visit him. And the prison inmate was played by Danny Glover. Very well. You know, I do like Danny Glover, and I thought that he played him extremely well. So the point is that he'd asked the bishop to come in effectively because he'd been caught with drugs in his cell, and his parole had been withdrawn, and he was going to have to spend another 7 years in prison, and he was already 70 years old, and he was asking the bishop, his nephew, whether he could do him the favour of vouching for him by writing a letter to the parole board. And so Carlton Pearson said to him, "So you brought me here not to be saved by Jesus, but you brought me here for this letter." And this created a bit of a conflict, and the end result was that he would not write him the letter. He said, "Look, you're not ready to be saved by Jesus yet. I'll come back, and when you're ready to be saved by Jesus, and then we'll talk about the letter." Okay, so he went away, and guess what happened? The poor old guy died. So the point is that he died without being saved, meaning that according to the doctrine of the church and most of Christianity, from what I can see, is that he was going to burn in hell. And obviously this pricked his conscience, the bishop's conscience, because he realized that he had a chance to save him and that he hadn't done it, and that consequently his uncle was going to perish in hell. And this, I think, made him start to question the whole point about it. And the next time when he gave his sermon, he astonished everybody by questioning it and saying, "Look, would a loving God send people to hell? What about all the Africans? What about people around the world who've grew up in other cultures and never had the opportunity to find Jesus? Am I to understand that the God that we've been worshipping all these years is going to send them all into hell. And then he went on to say this God that we've been worshipping is a monster, but that isn't the God. The God that we really should be worshipping is a loving God who wouldn't send anybody to hell. And of course, if you forgive the pun, all hell broke loose after that. People started getting up and walking out. And so he was summoned to a character called Oral Roberts, strange name, played by Martin Sheen, very well played by Martin Sheen, who had mentored him and had kind of brought him through the ranks to the position of bishop. And he basically got a good telling off, saying, "What are you doing? You're speaking heresy. We can't have this. You'll have to recant. You'll have to go back next week and reverse what you've done. How do you know it was God who was speaking to you? How do you know it wasn't the devil? It must have been the devil, because only through Christ can you be saved." So the plan was that he was going to, in the next big sermon that he gave, everybody was waiting with bated breath for him to recant on what he'd said. And he started off saying, "Oh, well, I regret what I said last week." And then all of a sudden he started quoting scriptures one after the other, proving his point that when Jesus died, he died for the whole of mankind. In other words, including those in Africa who've never even heard of him. He died for everybody, not just believers. And of course, that's when people started standing up and saying, "No, that's rubbish. You don't know your scriptures." And then they started walking out, and his whole congregation, or at least it looked like 3/4 of his congregation, just turned their backs on him and walked out. He split the church down the middle. He basically got left on his own. Reading his biography, or reading some more details about him on Wikipedia, it seems that, and this wasn't included in the film, but because I think it was a more dramatic and personal thing, that this character played by Danny Glover had reached out to him for some practical help in getting out of prison. He hadn't given it, and he died. And according to the Christian doctrine, he was going to roast in hell. That was quite a good sort of dramatic touch. But in reality, what had happened is that the bishop this was at a time when we had genocide going on in Rwanda. And he'd seen reports of tens of thousands of people being slaughtered. And he just pondered that these oppressed people who were subject to genocide, subject to the forces of evil, if you like, were going to not only lose their lives in a horrible way, but because they died not being saved by Jesus, they were also going to roast in hell for all eternity. And obviously, for me as an atheist, I obviously reject the whole lot, but I'd rather meet a Christian who doesn't believe in the doctrine of eternal damnation than one who does. And for me, it's like, you've got the hardline Christians like William Lane Craig, who believes that only through Christ can you be saved. And then you've got other Christians like John Crossan, who doesn't believe in a literal resurrection. And it seems from what I've heard, he rejects the doctrine of hell also, and eternal damnation. And then the next stage after that is atheism. Or, well, no, not quite. The next stage after that, I suppose, is pick and choose kind of Christianity, a sort of buffet-style Christianity where you can reject hell, but you can take the Sermon on the Mount and that type of thing. You don't have to go to church. But then the next after that, I suppose, is deism. And then the next after that is atheism. So for me, at least, Christians who are now saying, well, I reject the doctrine of hell and eternal damnation, just like this bishop did, they're one step closer to atheism. And the only thing about what he did is that he stayed firmly in the Christianity camp. But I kind of agree with the hardline Christians who say that unless only the saved will go to heaven, there's no point in Christianity. There really isn't. Unless, and in fact, Michael Licona has also said this in his debates. If Jesus is not risen, if Jesus, if I'm not to be saved through Jesus, then my Christianity is false. And Christians who are deciding that there is no hell, I personally can't see the point in Christianity. The whole point for me, or at least from what I can see, the main unique selling point is that only through Christianity and being saved by Jesus can you get into heaven. Why else would you be a Christian? Just for the pleasure of getting on your knees and worshipping something? I mean, you can worship something which is demonstrably real. You don't have to worship a mirage. So anyway, just coming back to the film, no, the really interesting point about it is that we've had a lot of Christians phoning in who have converted to atheism. They've come out, their families have ostracized them, they've lost their communities, they've found themselves isolated. In some cases, they've lost their jobs. And of course, in this bishop's case, he suddenly found that he had hardly a congregation. He couldn't afford to keep the enormous church going, which he'd been paying out for, out of obviously the collections that people were leaving behind. There was one scene in there where one of the top people in his church had come back to see how he was getting on. And it was quite amazing that they were discussing their congregations like, how's business? Oh, well, as you can see, I'm having to move. I can't afford to keep this church going because I'm not getting enough people through the door. How are you doing? Well, we're doing 2 services a week now. We're expanding rapidly. Sounds like a business to me. So I thought it was very quite revealing film, but particularly the way that he became isolated, and even his wife was questioning what he was doing, and that she'd married somebody who she felt had a secure future, and he was effectively giving up a very lucrative business. So he ended up isolated, but at least he stood up for what he believed in, and probably what a lot of Christians deep down don't really believe, that everybody's going to hell. It wouldn't make any sense. He's quite right. If we're going to have a world religion, everybody's got to have a reasonable chance of believing in God, believing in Jesus. And obviously, people who grow up in Muslim societies haven't got a chance because they're indoctrinated into Islam. People living in remote tribes in Africa have got no chance because they've never even heard of Jesus. And not to mention all the other countries around the world where either Christianity just isn't a thing or it's not really very well promoted. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever for them to keep saying that only through Christ can one be saved. And of course, for me, it's all nonsense. But I like to see Christianity cracking, and I would like to see more top people in the church, as I think they are doing. There's an organization of ex-pastors, I believe, pastors who are now atheists, and I like to see Christians pulling each other apart. I like to see, there was a debate on that I saw recently where a Jewish rabbi was pulling apart Jesus, saying no, he's not divine, he's a fraud. And then the Christian, they're tearing each other to pieces. And I think more and more that as atheists, we should encourage this. We shouldn't have to do so much work. We should let religious people pull each other apart, because all the religions cancel each other out. They all knock each other out, and there's nothing left except non-belief, which really is the only rational way forward. What else to say about this film? So, yeah, I thought it was a good film. It didn't last too long. Of course, I was attracted to it straight away when I saw the word heresy. So I watched it on Netflix. It takes me a lot of time to find a film worth watching on Netflix, but when I saw this straight away, I thought, yep, that's a film worth watching. So let me know what you think, whether you've seen it, what your impressions were. I thought it was quite a good film, and I was also glad. I didn't know it was a true story when I watched it. It was only when I researched it afterwards that I saw, yeah, it was a true story. Okay, guys, that's enough for now. I'll come on in a few days and make another video. Bye for now.